Water Conference 2023, promoted by CEDEBS, which is the Brazilian Council for Sustainable Development, with the World Business Council. I'm André Mello. I'm coordinating the water chamber for the development, sustainable development in Brazil. We are a non-profit organization for 16 years, 26 years, been promoting sustainable development, articulating with government, civil society. We have more than 105 members, company members, that have a revenue of 50% of our total Brazilian revenue, GDP. These companies are all here involved with sustainable development. Another important point is that today's event is a very excellent opportunity to advance. I'd like to thank the organizers, our sponsors that have made the project feasible, which is Igua and Vale. This panel is an articulation that has been worked on the theme chamber, and the impact we want to generate is to make companies, including their business models, the water management strategically, showing measurable results for water safety, universalization of sanitation, and availability of water. That has talked a lot about the strategic objectives, so the companies have this knowledge and this development to implement these measures in the institutional area and expand the knowledge. The pillars we've been working on are water security. We have a commitment of the Brazilian companies, and we have several signatories. We work with water resilience versus climate change, the resilience we have to have due to the uncertainty of scenarios, all kinds of water and nature. This is one of our discussions. Another point is the business sector for universalization of basic sanitation, supply, sanitation, waste management, and urban drainage. So working on these 4 pillars, we're working towards universalization of sanitation. Law 14.026 that deals with one of the points we have to keep in mind. Until 2023, we have to universalize sanitation in Brazil in 2 areas. 99% of the population that has safe quality water, and 90% of the population with collection and sanitation treatment. If we improve this scenario, we'll be very well off here in Brazil. Another point we're working on is the water footprint, circularity. So we're dealing with circular economies, water circularity, circulation, recycling, reuse, and water reusage. And when we identify the impacts on the chain and the cycle of life in this sense, in 2021 and 22, we had a very important journey for the water reuse that generated several publications for training and mobilization of the business sector. Combining in, here I leave for you the last publications that we had on this theme. I asked these to put in the chat if you want to access them. Point your cell phones to the QR code so you can check these publications. Water for reuse, fact sheets, all very important if you're going to publish scientific articles, fact sheets, technical workshops. I inform you that this event is being broadcast in English and Portuguese by YouTube. Videos are available on the chat box. If you want to practice your English, watch in English. If you're learning Portuguese and want to practice Portuguese, you can do so too. After this brief presentation about SEDEG and the water chamber, I invite Renata Andres, specialist at Vale, to present and mediate the discussions we're having today. I hope you all have a great event, that you can extract the maximum of these super specialists and interact on the chat. So we'll hand it to Renata. The floor is yours. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much for your presentation, for the welcome. It's a pleasure to be here talking to you. I'm Renata Andreas, and I'm a water resources specialist at Vale, and I'll help this side event as a moderator. Today we have some very important guests like Samuel Barreto, National Water Manager at TNC, Anki Manuela Salzman, Project Manager at Boticário Group Foundation, Pericles Weber, COO of Iguá Sanitation, José Alexandre Maximini, District Attorney of the Prosecutor's Office in Rio, Mr. André Barreto, Executive Manager at Wetlands Construídos, André Mello, the coordinator that presented just now, who is the coordinator at CT Water, and Mr. Braulio Moreira, Director of the World Business Council. Next, please. So what's our schedule for today? Well, we're going to begin with an opening that has been done by Mr. André, participation of introduction of the participants, and then we're going to talk about institutional strategies and the importance of this theme of solution based on nature. Then we'll go through challenges and developments of these solutions. And then to exemplify, we're going to show some success cases. Then Mr. Baxter Barreto, Pericles, and Anki, and Mr. José Alexandre Maximino will participate. In the end, we will debate and discuss questions made by the public, and then we'll close with final notes and closing. So our main objective of this side event is to discuss the management of water risks within the operations and value chain, promoting water security not only for businesses, but also for the communities in which your business is included, as well as finding positional solutions aiming for conscious use of water based on SDG 6 as a guide for these cooperation efforts. And now we're going to begin with Mr. Braulio Moreira, please. Welcome. Essa apresentação é sobre o arcabouço de como acreditamos que o World Business Council
the last couple of years throughout our work. Next slide, please. So in terms of the SDGs, and specifically SDG 6, we need to consider that actually right now we are not ready to achieve those objectives. And this is something that is evident. The data is something that the data shows. Yesterday, actually, there was a big report by IPCC in which the scientific community globally highlighted that actually we should be very worried about the work we are doing, and that's changing a path, changing the way we do business, changing the way we go about our day-to-day lives is an imperative right now. It's not an imperative for 4 years, it's an imperative right now. And water is part of this problem. At the moment, there is no access to water and sanitation globally. At the moment, water conservation is something that is far from achieving the objectives that we need to achieve in order to ensure a resilient access, an equitable access for water for everyone. Next slide, please. So what have we been doing at WBCSD? Basically, we have been working for more than a decade in addressing specific challenges that corporations, that companies have been identifying in the last decade. That includes elements around wastewater, and this is of course no surprise for anyone that the facilities that companies have in order to produce goods to operate create pollution. There's no surprise for that. But what are the right ways to go about that? What are the priorities? What are the targets? Who we need to engage with? That is the type of guidelines, ideas that WBCSD creates together with the member companies. And also, we believe that that conversation needs to expand beyond elements of pollution, also need to start exploring the space of circularity. We really need to start reusing more of the water we use on a day-to-day basis, and then really engage with climate objectives associated with, of course, climate mitigation, but very importantly about regenerating the environment. And this is why the conversation today is so important. We shouldn't just, rest and relax if our companies have achieved, good climate targets. What matters is what is happening around us, what is happening in the communities where we operate. And this is why thinking from a resilience perspective and thinking from a nature perspective as well is so important. Next slide, please. So in terms of WBCSD and how we try to engage companies to do this, we have identified a number of pathways. And one of those pathways for action is water and sanitation. And you will see in the screen that a number of those action areas are associated with the links between water and communities, water and of course the operations of the corporations, but very importantly, water and nature. So we need to see this as a continuum, not as a number of boxes that need to be ticked in our operating plans, but really think about these imperatives as frameworks for action, and really think beyond our own operations, and really think about our employees, the communities where we operate, and the ecosystems that exist in the places where our companies operate across the whole value chain. Next slide, please. So in terms of very specifically what WBCSD does, and perhaps I'm going to go through this very quickly. First of all, for us, what matters is that the scrutiny under which companies are under, it goes beyond the work of, some NGOs in which, talking very openly, many actors tend to ignore sometimes. Sometimes also we perceive that governments are really taking action, and that is something that we might perceive as problematic for business. The challenge is that the scrutiny goes way beyond that. Climate change is here, and taking action to address climate change issues is something that is showing its value, not only for civil society, not only for governments, but also for corporations. And we can see increasing evidence that financing organizations see with better eyes, perceive in a better way when corporations actually do engage in a proactive way, in an appropriate way, with challenges associated with the environment, with climate, with nature. So it is way beyond, political risk. This is really about the financial sustainability of organizations as well. Next slide, please. So in that context, the work we are doing in WBCSD tries to develop a systemic perspective. So addressing not only specific problems, but trying to explore various aspects across the value chain. So in the three key programs we are delivering at the moment, first of all, consider freshwater accountability. What this is really about water conservation. This is really about how companies can understand how much water they consume, how much water they use, and where the challenges are. If our companies, if leader companies are going in the direction of water positive operations, where do we start? And that's what one of the elements that WBCSD is trying to help. Where companies should start take actions, what are the, the processes in place, and what are the KPIs we should go after. In terms of water consumption and water consumption in cities, which is one of the themes that we will be exploring in this session, 50 Liter Home Coalition is really about building water efficiency. I'm going to say more about this later on. And finally, we continue working about the challenges around the challenges of wastewater. Wastewater is a massive problem, particularly in the global south. And therefore, we have heard from our members that more and more guidelines, more and more examples, more and more detail is required to be able to have operations that actually align with sustainability objectives as well as nature objectives. Next, please. So in 50 Liter Home, we created an alliance of member companies that actually are willing to explore two issues simultaneously: water conservation as well as energy conservation. Reason being is that when we heat water, when we consume water, we also consume energy. And exploring that problem, really exploring how buildings can be much more efficient in an integrated way, is really our challenge. Next, please. And what we are exploring is not only about, water conservation measures, it is also about how the experiences, those products, those appliances can also provide an enjoyable experiences for consumers. And here's why. The reason is that if the future in which we are very efficient in terms of water, if we are very efficient in terms of energy use, is not a future that consumers, people can engage with, is not a future that is livable, it's going to be very difficult to achieve those objectives. So we also work on that aspect of communicating with people, also in creating better experiences, and also, of course, very importantly, in identifying what are the solutions and what are the policies that are required to enable that future living at low carbon and also, of course, with low water consumption. Next slide, please. And just very quickly to talk about, what is the focus areas. For us, it's about demonstrating the viability of those solutions, demonstrating that there is something that technology can do, but technology and innovation is never going to be sufficient. We also need to engage with consumers. We need to engage with people. We need to share knowledge with them. And also we need to hear people and to hear what works for them, why, and how we can improve those solutions we're putting out in the market, and also the policies that governments are putting in place in order to promote water and energy efficiency. So then this is where the second focus area, which is about public policy to enable scaling up, is something that is really fundamental. How innovation can support building a pathway for city governments, for state governments to achieve water efficiency in a way that also doesn't create problems for the climate mitigation agendas. We explored that for cities like Beijing and Los Angeles and Bombay in Mumbai in India. And we have realized that each city has a different pathways. So how we can help cities to achieve this pathway, how we can help communities and cities to achieve water efficiency by keeping their cultures in mind, by keeping their behaviors in mind, and by really engaging in a proactive and positive way. Next slide, please. And to finalize, because probably I'm running out of time, I have 3 ideas I wanted to share with you in terms of how to achieve better water outcomes and how to engage with those agendas that are fundamental for our world's survival. First of all, it's about thinking from a systemic perspective, not only thinking about the assets. where our companies operate, but also what are the implications of the performance of our, of our companies, of the buildings that we inhabit, also the infrastructure we put in place, and thinking about the consequences in other parts of the value chain, in other parts of the system. Only by thinking in the system, we will be able to ensure that the use of water as well as energy is sustainable. Next, please. Also, it's really fundamental in our perspective to consider the nexus between water and energy and carbon emissions. So as I said before, when we think about carbon emissions in cities, we always think about energy consumption. But what is the problem there? Is that to use water, we also need energy to heat that water. To make a cup of tea, we need to use energy to heat that water. And this is something that time after time we find that in cities, studies, etc., that is not considered. And it turns out that the use of water in buildings is the second source of operational carbon emissions in buildings in cities globally. So how we address that, how we make sure that by focusing on one aspect, we're not missing the other aspects, the other sources of carbon emissions. So looking at the nexus, the connections between water and other systems is fundamental. And the third one, third point, next slide, please, is really about thinking of water reuse and really recognizing that reusing water takes very different shapes in different places. And even in the same places for corporates, water reuse might look different from water reuse in homes. So we have found that, just looking at the Americas, in residential buildings, in buildings in general, we have found that there are solutions that recycle all the waters from an office building, like the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission building in San Francisco, that reutilizes most of its water. But in Latin America, that takes different shapes. For example, the rainwater harvesting systems that are very popular in Mexico City, and in Santiago de Chile, a couple of pilot projects that are around reusing the water from social housing developments in order to make sure that the plants, the vegetations around these developments are also alive. So thinking about what are the possibilities, thinking from a systems perspective, I believe is something that can bring new solutions and more integrated ideas to ensure the sustainability of our communities and our nations. Thank you so much.
Excelente, Braulio, excelente apresentação. Então, gente, para a gente agora...
Excellent presentation, Braulio. Thank you. Now, to exemplify this content, we're going to go into these success cases regarding this theme. So I'm going to invite Samuel Barreto. Samuel, are you here? Hello, Renata. Here I am. Yes, please go ahead and welcome. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody that's watching. I thank Sibeds for the invitation to exchange experiences, learning experiences, and speaking about the importance of this conference, the UN conference, which is the second one held by the UN. The last was in 1977. So it's a very important moment about a matter that is strategic for us, water or life. So I'm going to discuss some of the aspects that show challenges. So the next slide, I'm going to just show you some numbers, a summary of the opera of everything we face in terms of water risks, when only 30% of the rivers have free flows without dams, without interruptions of the aquatic dynamics, of the risks related to climate change. Of 10 disasters, 8 at least are connected to access or lack of water. In Brazil, just remember what happened in Carnival in the north coast of São Paulo, or Hurricane Fred, that for 4 weeks affected and impacted the African coast on the western side and Madagascar, Mozambique. So these are some results that show us the risks. And what does this lead us to? To an impact that is gigantic. Since the 70s, we lost 84 of our freshwater species, much more than the impact on land systems and sea systems. So at the end of the day, we're talking about a biodiversity crisis that affects the planet and consequently the loss of ecosystemic services, the quality and the amount of water. So an important aspect in today's debate are solutions based on nature of what can be delivered in fighting climate change. 37% of the answers to keep temperatures stable, less than 2 degrees, is something we cannot not consider. But to talk about solutions based on nature, we must also bring up an issue about the concepts. And a concept that we're aligned with is one of the Universal Union for Conservation of Nature, how to manage sustainably and restore natural ecosystems or changed that deal with social challenges, allowing for multiple benefits to human well-being and biodiversity. So an example is when we're looking at the landscape, this is important to understand reforestation, soil conservation, conservation of the forests, like the Atlantic rainforest in Brazil that lost a large amount of its original area, and also the Brazilian Cerrado, 50% of the bioma there has been converted. So as we have this intervention and this landscape planning, we can increment environmental services, retention of sediments, nutrients, infiltration of water in the soil. Speaking about the impact of climate change, so that the water can infiltrate and not run off on the surface, supplying the phreatic water levels, and this brings benefits, environmental and socio-economic. The storage of the aquifers, for example, reduces the peaks of amplitude between droughts and floods. This is one of the functions of the solutions based on nature. I don't know if the next slide has a video. Let's see. Let's see if the video runs.
Just to quickly explain the slide before, simulation of the solutions, nature-based solution. It's like an area with forest coverage. When it rains, on the right side, the water, instead of infiltrating, it comes out the side. As you can see on the left-hand example, the water goes through much more quickly instead of seeping, thus reducing these peaks. And during the drought, this water would be able to come back to rivers through the springs, resupplying our surface waters. So this is one demonstration of nature-based solutions that can be offered, so to speak. So a few experiences here. One of them we've been working on in the town of Extrema, between the states of São Paulo and Minas Gerais in southeastern Brazil. Talking of lessons learned, this is about using existing resources. Payment for environmental services in Brazil. What existed there? The Environment Secretary, Paulinho, ascertained that there were very little resources. A donkey, an old beetle, and some wood. This became a 20,000 reais consolidated program, nowadays amounting to 6 million reais, medium-sized municipality, many partnerships, and the water transformation program used a conservative program transforming 400 municipalities. The idea is to restore over 1 million hectares, providing as well as water safety, biodiversity, job creation. So, first of all, we have to work with existing resources, reinforce the environmental structure, reinforce strategic partnerships. And here, these are the important players, such as rural landowners. Without them, nothing will happen. So this whole support process, contribution to landscape planning, in order for there to be a productive landscape so that we can work towards such an important set of actions. So we have to maintain the conserved areas, the areas under restoration, the springs, an important aspect where you don't usually have to do that much, where you dry the area. If you dry the area, there may be self-regeneration, natural recovery. This is great for saving resources, to provide scale to these interventions. So use all possibilities, all possible technologies in order to accelerate the restoring process. Also, cost reduction. Another social technology, which are the small ponds, about soil management, which makes water seep. At the same time, it retains sediments which could run into a river, leading to silting. So in this landscape planning, this is one of the things that may happen, because it's all about biological function. These level plans can reduce erosion, which they can be also, as well as rural properties, roads. Usually they are badly managed and badly designed, so this is very helpful. Rural sanitation is very important both for people's health. Sanitation also is important for animal health. As well as reducing diseases, it can also increase water quality. A very important activity as well to be developed. Monitoring. Without monitoring, it's difficult to assess and measure what is going on. So this is water monitoring, biodiversity monitoring, and also restoration monitoring. So we can follow up the way and the function. Instead of just monitoring the tree, it's about monitoring the forest. Then this improves ecosystemic services. Now, no one alone will solve something so complex. So in the case of the São Paulo State Initiative, you can see at the top the amount of municipalities, social organizations, research bodies, government entities, the basin committees, the water regulation agencies, water companies, multilateral agencies, worldwide partnerships, all taking part, showing that collective actions, when they bring together civil society, private initiative, and governments, this is an important path for there to be this pact established, not just about solutions, but a set of actions in relevant areas. We're talking about an area here which is responsible for supplying over 16 million people, representing 27% of Brazilian GDP in the specific region of São Paulo in question. Some references to show in terms of lessons learned. Nobody or no resource on their own will solve this, but we must combine different resources, including existing resources, so as not to compete with health and education sources. So the Basin Committee, legal frameworks that can be supported within the municipality, such as Jundiaí, Jaguariúna, to name but a few, environmental services, major water users, also environmental compensation mechanisms. Sanitation sector also has an essential role and also a great protagonist in terms of recovery of our water basins. So to talk here about combining different resource sources to impact better. Next, please. Economic instruments, one of them, such as PSA, which generates benefits for the community. They can also benefit, the owners can benefit from improving their land vis-a-vis production, forest reconstruction. According to the Brazilian Forestry Code, there are still 20 years to go to measure their recovery if this is necessary. So what we're doing is encouraging the anticipation of this benefit for all water users. Finally, just to mention a few of the lessons learned in the process, there is growing interest in nature-based solutions due to the ability to approach both economically the social and economic environmental challenges and the potential to implement these solutions in scale. This is an important piece of evidence to be able to bring the decision-making and subsidies to enable these actions to be implemented. That's just talking sanitation. Less than 1% of companies in the small and medium companies in the world use this kind of solution, less than 1%. There is also a need for greater clarity in terms of the approach cycles, some gaps to be filled, greater clarity in terms of approaching nature-based solution. It's also important socially to encourage the adoption of this approach. Government agencies, municipalities, and companies who are not looking, as Braulio said, to the importance of a systemic approach. So under this kind of approach, one essential pillar are the nature-based solutions in order to generate water safety. And finally, I'd like to invite everyone here. We are going to launch this report called The Invisible Reservoir. It will be in person, also online, on the 23rd of March at 2 p.m. to 3:15 p.m. New York time, add 1 hour for Brazil. It's about the Cantareira system, water and economic analysis, showing the evidence of the impacts in terms of water quantity and economic impact. This work was accepted by Water Journal, a scientific publication, which is very important to us because it helps to show scientific evidence vis-a-vis nature-based solution. So once again, on behalf of TNC, I'm here available for your questions. Thank you. Yes, Samuel, we do have a possible path forward through nature-based solutions, also behavioral changes, and major partnerships towards well-being and biodiversity. Thank you for being here and for sharing your content and cases with us. We will now move on to the success cases presentation. So first of all, André Baxter, you have the floor. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your invitation. I'm honored to be here and flattered as well. And I'm going to talk about a more technological approach, a more practical point of view with regard to water treatment, effluent, and slurry. One of the technologies that this set called nature-based solution possesses, which is the constructed wetlands system, or reed beds, constructed wetlands in French, filtre planté de roseaux, in English also, treatment wetlands, in Spanish, humedales artificiales, many titles. So let's move on. Next slide, please. So my name is André Baxter Barreto. I am a master and PhD in sanitation and water resources from the University of Minas Gerais. I'm a biologist. I consider myself a sanitation biologist. based on the strictest sensor solutions I've developed. And I've worked for 15 years on the nationalization of know-how and opening up the market for wetlands technologies built in Brazil. And I am now in a position at the Wetlands Construídos company. I've broken down my presentation in 3 short bits. First of all, we're going to talk about what are constructed wetlands. Then we're going to talk about what it is for, and then why we are going to use this, why we should use it. So, what are constructed wetlands? This is a worldwide disseminated and solid system from the 40s, 50s, 1960s when it started, and today it is finding industrial level scale, municipal level scale, very important scales, and it's been perfected throughout its development trajectory. So we can mention one of the largest constructed wetlands parks, built parks in France. It's a group of France, Germany, Austria. In France alone, there are 5,000 sewage treatment stations, municipal stations, called Filtre Planté de Closeau. In Britain, we have the largest system in the world to treat slurry in water treatment stations, sludge treatment. In Denmark, we have many systems to treat sludge and sewage treatment stations, wastewater treatment stations, slash sludge. And in Oman, we have the largest system in the world, 360 hectares, the largest system in the world to treat water, oil prospect wells. It was considered by the Water Association, and the spotlights have been on it worldwide. In the USA, there are major projects to make effluent water drinkable, to treat river water, amongst others. There are many cases worldwide, in essence. In Brazil, we have major potential because we have a continent-sized country. The technology is adherent to our demographics, our geography, and our social and economic situation. So, what are these systems for? What do they serve for? Let's talk about that briefly. We have many application sectors. We like to group together these sectors in 3. So applications in the municipal sector, we're talking about effluent treatment in municipalities, neighborhoods, populations up to 15,000 inhabitants, sludge treatment for sewage treatment stations up to 150,000 inhabitants, fecal sludge treatment, septic tank material treatment on many scales, and effluent polishing at treatment stations for sewage. At an industrial level, we have the treatment of industrial effluents, industrial process water or industrial effluent treatment for reuse or for discarding, biological sludge treatment, septic tank sludge again, and water treatment, water pre-treatment for supply. In mining companies, we have many applications, from acids drainage from mining, treatment of this water, sanitation effluents at mining companies, waste pile and tailings piles, water treatment, many treatments, and it's not the same thing. It's not all the same thing, I must say. For each application, there is a specific type of engineering. So it's a versatile and flexible type of engineering, which has many types of projects to be worked on and built. Here we have a few pictures illustrating what a sewage treatment plant in a municipality, in a neighborhood, in a district of 400 inhabitants. This is the layout in that case. Another image here for a treatment station for a town, district, neighborhood of 2,000 inhabitants. That is the aspect it would have, or it has, I should say. Now we're talking about a sludge treatment station. On the lower right, bottom right, we have a sludge treatment station for 10,000 inhabitants. In the middle of the picture, we have a sludge treatment station of these treatment stations. This is an example of what this technology can be, and this is exclusive to this technology. It's a single integration with the landscape, including a sewage treatment station and making it a work of art. Landscaping. This is an effluent treatment station in an industry with about 700 employees. Here we have an example of fecal matter septic tank sludge treatment, very common in towns without sewage treatment, major companies, industries, mining water treatment. There are many specific types of engineering with metal removal, turbidity removal. Each case in this case will demand one type of different setting, different system. One more example of an implemented system that deals with for mining companies for waste piles, also tailings pile, 10,000 square meters system of the treatment system area, I should say. And then why use this technology after all this? Let's talk about that. This system is totally aligned with the ESG logic, low complexity, operational complexity, low tech. This technology does not emit carbon to the atmosphere. It's low carbon. It's totally aligned with circular economy and regenerative development, as well as sustainable development. We're not just sustainable, we are regenerative, and it's a nature-based solution as well. And the great thing about this technology is that it is the key for us to reach climate funding. I'm talking about companies, industries, where we are able to get a better score in terms of green climate and sustainability bones grades. And one more slide to finish here. There are many advantages such as high performance, very low operational demand, very low energy consumption, no odors. It's basic, durable, low depreciating, operational stability, passive mineralization in the system itself. It takes the sludge and uses it in agriculture. It has full landscape integration, and it's carbon neutral. So this is basically why we should implement these systems and for whom. So goodbye from me. That's it from me. If anyone is interested in talking more about this, you can get in touch with us. That's our website, our phone numbers. Do get in touch. Thanks very much. Very valuable contribution there, Andrea. Great presentation. The use of constructed wetlands technology for many applications worldwide. Great presentation. And we are able to bring together water treatment, sanitation, biodiversity, low carbon, and why not join all this with beautiful landscaping. And now, Mr. Pericles Weber, you have the floor. Welcome. Pericles, are you there? Well, we'll wait a bit for Pericles. Could we put Anke Salzman from the Fundo Boticário, Grupo Boticário Foundation, before Pericles comes here to talk to us? So, Anke Salzman, you can present your success cases within the Grupo Boticário Foundation. Welcome to this panel. Thanks very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you here today and talk to you a bit about our case. Just to give you some context, Grupo Boticário Foundation is a corporate foundation which has existed for over 30 years in Brazil, promoting nature conservation, and it is supported by the Boticário Group, one of the main companies today in Brazil in the cosmetics industry. The Viva Água, Long Live Water movement was brought into effect by our group, and it has a view to connect actors to promote water safety and adaptation to climate changes in strategic Brazilian water basins, which are essential for water supply. This is on two fronts: nature conservation and encouragement and transition towards a sustainable economy. And when we talk about these two objectives, this means to work within the areas with conservation restoration actions, also soil management, sustainable soil management, entrepreneurship through social and environmental and entrepreneurship in the areas, also providing important contributions to the chain. We started in 2019 in the Minguava River Basin, Miringuava, which is in the municipality of São José dos Pinhais, where we have one of our factories of Boticário. And in 2019, we took the Viva Água movement to Guanabara Bay in Rio de Janeiro, southeastern Brazil. Minguava Basin is in southern Brazil. So how did this all start? In 2018, the Boticário Group came to us to build with them a water strategy. So we started off with our factory in São José dos Pinhais in southern Brazil, and to understand where the water that supplies our factory comes from, which was from the Miringuava River Basin. When we understood this context better, it became very clear that this water strategy must be much more comprehensive than just looking at our factory. So thus, the idea comes up for fomenting this water movement, which allows companies and other actors to connect their impacts and their dependencies geared towards important nature conservation movements. In each territory we operate in, we have established financial mechanisms to finance these actions, which have been and are implemented during the movement. These funds are provided by philanthropic, public, and private sector players. In terms of the Viva Água function, water has, of course, an essential role. So it will help us to promote climate and water resilience. In the Viva Água movement, we have an interesting study to show the importance of nature vis-a-vis water conservation. So we have observed that rivers in basins with a higher level of native vegetation coverage have 6 to 11% during drier seasons in terms of coverage. In water basins, which are very much in an urban setting, they reduce their flow up to 52% compared to the 11. So this shows how important nature is to conserve water in the soil. Within this context, in terms of creating information to show how much nature-based solutions are important towards water and climate resilience, we have built another study within Viva Água to understand the benefits, the economic and environmental benefits of nature-based solutions implemented throughout the movement. So we consider the following scenarios: to the restoration of 650 hectares, conserve 1,500 hectares, for example, payment for environmental services as presented before, and also encouragement towards sustainable agriculture in 500 hectares. So that is what our program has as its agenda. We have in terms of a drier scenario, what has modeling shown us? Till 2030, we expect to see an extra 1 million cubic meters of water in the soil, which are gradually released to high water bodies during drought periods. This also helps with supplying 6,500 households per year. This way, we would be reducing sediments coming into the rivers in 21% and also capturing 18,000 tons of carbon, especially through restoration of degraded areas. We also look from the economic point of view. We currently know that for every R1 invested in conservation restoration action, nature-based solutions within our movement, we have an expected return of R2.46. In other words, double that which is invested. We currently have, as I said, two structured movements. Viva Agua movement has 17 partners, and the Viva Agua Guanabara currently has 9 partners. And this, a major legacy which the Viva Agua movement has left within the Boticário group, is the commitment that we have till 2030 to invest in the conservation of the natural resources, natural capital, which is critical for our business to be everlasting. So we understand the resources. Water is one of them, of course. And the idea is to map them out, understand what is critical and prioritize this, and develop strategies so that through nature conservation actions, the business can continue to sustainably and healthily continue use these resources. We are developing a water strategy, which will definitely provide many opportunities to implement nature-based solutions in Brazil, and many opportunities for sustainable development projects from here on in. Thank you, Anki.
Yeah, this strategy, looking beyond production, offers us great results. Water security and climate change also. So once again, I invite Mr. Pericles Weber. Are you online? Hello, Renata. So super welcome. Sorry, my internet is very unstable. I've dropped out 3 times. So I did watch some of the presentations, but unfortunately, I missed out a few things. Let's hope everything runs well so that you can conclude your presentations. So thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm going to comment on what Iguá Saneamento has done regarding the water security plan, since our supply is our main raw material, and it's indispensable to guarantee the life of the populations. So having the security that this water will be available in quantity and quality throughout the next years is essential to everybody. So in general terms, we have adopted the PSH indicator on the water agency's plan as a way, a KPI for us to measure the risks of our supply areas. So Iguá has 16 operations in 25 supplies, and our concern is to monitor and control this in a robust manner. So adopting the indicator in the 3 dimensions, human, ecosystem, and resilience, it's possible for us to have an idea of how we stand and what we have to do in terms of to guarantee this availability. So we applied our indicator to 25 supply points, and as you can see in our score, we have 3.86, which is close to a high level of security. But when we look and stratify this individually, we see that most are in a high security situation, but 4 call our attentions. Patia do Alferes, which is a town in the interior of Rio, where we have begun operations. We began operations last year, and historically, during the dry season, the spring is very fragile, and the flow is greatly reduced, not allowing us to supply the demand in the region. We began operating the system last February. We looked for alternatives in the dry season, August, September, October, to be able to address a solution. But unfortunately, or fortunately, we were happy with the solutions we adopted. We had to find a new emergency spring. We brought a water treatment station, a portable station, until the new system is ready. We had interaction with the community and society. It was essential in the concept of sustainable use of water. We had actions to reduce losses and allowed us last year to avoid problems in Patia de Alferes. We were finally able to spend a whole year servicing the needs, but the indicator is low, and this requires actions to be reverted in the coming years. We have Canarã and Pontes de Lacerda in Mato Grosso that also suffer with droughts. Pontes de Lacerda is more to the southwest, and Cuiabá, we have a characteristic that 70% of the water comes from the Cuiabá River that has great quality water and gives us a lot of security. But the spring, Oxipó de Ouro, has significant quality variations that places it in an average security level. It's an important attention point. Measures taken on the basin, the environmental agencies and public agents, as well as our own actions to guarantee that even in the critical periods, we can maintain the supply. So this leads to several measures that we adopted at Iguá as a way to manage our raw material. The first one is the mapping and diagnosis of the basins to identify attention points, commitment risks for quality and quantity, monitoring of the rainfall in the region and water contribution, especially during droughts or dry seasons, monitoring of the quality of water and attention points regarding irregular and clandestine sewage and effluents. And also when springs are cut by rivers where we have risk of contaminations from accidents. So in this diagnosis, we identify these regions, these vulnerable points in terms of accidents or contamination. We have emergency plans based on our environmental management system. We have specific procedures. And in some cases, we have drills. These capture points have emergency kits, containment buoys and barriers in order to prevent a spill or an emergency, preventing the dirty water from contaminating our processes, eliminating the risk of this water reaching the populations. This is an important point. and the quality measurements and quantity measurements in the locations where we capture water, many of them with online analysis about water quality. Also, naturally, we are extra careful to maintain these water capture areas, water intake areas, guaranteeing plantation of natural vegetation, preventing sediments and toxic products from being carried into the water bodies. And fundamentally, the work that we do with the communities, with environmental education and doing advocacy together, or with the prosecutor's office, environmental agencies, so that everybody understands that the issue of water is something we all have to worry about. It's not just sanitation. The sanitation company has to monitor quality and guarantee that water is distributed in good standards. But we need springs and conditions to be treated, and this is a tension point for everybody, not just the sanitation company. So this is how we have used our water safety plan with several actions for each spring. And recently, we have begun a study to assess the impact of climate change on the springs throughout the next decades. This study will allow us to assess the social and environmental impacts and the economic impacts on these springs due to climate changes that are occurring. And IGWA has tried to establish and adopt procedures and processes and technologies which are low carbon emissions to contribute towards this crusade that the whole world is involved in. So this is what I had to present to you, and I'm available for questions. Thank you. Excellent, Pericles. How nice to hear you. And it's perceptible that this indicator that IGWA implemented allowed for the understanding of the water safety in several municipalities to be able to perform strategies for sustainable and responsible water supply. Now, Mr. José Maximino from the Rio de Janeiro Prosecutor's Office, please take the floor. Welcome. Good morning, Renata, and everybody watching. A great pleasure to be here. It's a great honor and satisfaction to be part of this qualified panel. Well, having seen the technical presentations, I think we have to reflect on what someone from the legal area has to collaborate with this theme, which we know that has a lot of vocation of hydrology, biology, economics. Everybody knows that it's transdisciplinary and multidisciplinary. A quick introduction on the importance of legal science. I like what Professor Howard Weber says. If scientific understanding represent challenges that are significant, the same occurs with water management. Water security in the 21st century is scientific and social issue. Therefore, it's necessary for a new approach, a transdisciplinary approach, to establish links between natural sciences and social sciences. I like this quote because it states the importance of law, modern constructions, and we're in a democratic state, and the state can only practice what its constitution and laws admit or allow for. The same in private companies with fiscal incentives. The state can only offer them if foreseen in law or command and control instruments, environmental licensing. So I'm going to bring you two experiences in which science, legal science, and justice system have collaborated for the conception and implementation of nature-based solutions. I begin with this case, which is the commitment term signed with Votorantim Cement, the prosecutor's office, and the committee of the Rio dos Dois Rios group. What is this agreement then? Let's see. Well, the activity of the enterprise, we assessed that they needed some corrections in its impact assessments regarding water management, atmospheric emissions, soil remediation, and compensatory measures for the non-mitigated negative impacts. And in April, we made 97, we signed the first agreement saying that instead of monetizing the impact or damage and using these resources in a fund that nobody knows how it will be used in Rio de Janeiro. So this resource for compensation used to go to other means or to the treasury, the conservation fund. We contemplated a model that could be restored, could be used to restore the basin where the enterprise occurred. If the negative impact was generated in that basin, then the compensation has to be reverted towards that same basin. So we made a first agreement foreseeing that the company would execute with the committee compensatory measures of Annex 3, which is a methodology that talks about the organization of a work group, the methodology to value the negative impacts. We met several times, even during the pandemic, to discuss the priority areas for restoration. We understood that the most adequate measure with greatest gains would be conservation and restoration. The second step was to define strategic areas. This was done. The third step was to value the negative impacts, soil, air, and water, and we reached a consensus about the amount 1,015,000 reais. The second step was, once defined the compensation, for the areas, how could you create a governance mechanism so that the resources could dewater into a project that would be robust and could bring the expected environmental gains? We signed a second agreement, an amendment in 2022, establishing in the second clause that the financial resources of the agreement would be applied exclusively to finance the project, to contemplate the protection areas, those contained in the basin plan. So we valued the basin plan, which is foreseen in our policies, water policies, and prioritized an institution in which INEA was fundamental to define the areas of interest for protection for multiple use, recreation, industrial, agricultural, as well as for human supply. The law and the UN consider priority in the multiple use of water. So human supply is always priority. Well, the group that has developed this work has selected the areas. AIPM is a protection area, basin protection area. So we estimated the benefited population. There's a water treatment station. Downstream, the area is going to be reforested. 4,220 people initially, another 20,403 people in a second municipality, Cordeiro, and in Cantagalo, 19,000 people. So adding all of this up, we have 44,000 people that will be supplied by these basins that will have forests and ecosystem restored. As Mr. Braulio mentioned, connected to ODS 6.6, which speaks about protection and conservation of water resources. Here's another view of the basin. It's rivers, creeks, and the water capture point downstream below of these springs. And now I'm going to talk about nature-based solutions aiming at the other extremes. So when we talk about the previous experience of regulating flow for droughts and floods, but the case I'm going to treat now is to mitigate the effects of floods. Here we have the case of Petropolis. This was a legal process that was very long, and we finally reached an agreement. And you must probably remember this event, Petropolis, a year ago, coincidentally. The event was in February, but we had another event in March as well. So two extreme climate events with high rainfall over 400 millimeters. How can you restore and prepare the city, or how to adapt it and make it resilient to new events? Among the discussions in this process, beyond gray engineering, drainage, tunnels, underground rivers that go through the city, dams to take water from one area to less occupied areas. We've discussed nature-based solution, and UN in its intergovernmental committee has encouraged this, reducing disaster risk reduction program. The idea, the urban risk flood mitigation from Stanford University, which is mitigating and how reforestation of a basin can mitigate the effects of floods. And this modeling of this system from Stanford University, this tool, allows one to bring numbers and rates from the input of diagnosis data for the basin selected, imagine and foresee scenarios how the degraded basin behaves in low, moderate, and intense rainfall, and how the restored basin, with its forest coverage, conservation of the soil, and sustainable agricultural system, how it behaves with the same events. And modeling these scenarios, you can see that the nature-based solutions bring us the capacity to reduce surface flow and reducing the peak of the floods. In concluding, the interesting part of this process has been the dialogue with with universities, and to bring us a legal process, and bring in technologies that are contemporary and more effective and bring multiple benefits, such as enriching biodiversity, carbon sequestration, and regularization of the flow of springs in droughts and in floods. And after I close in thanking you, and I hope you enjoyed, and I'm here for Q&A. Excellent. That was an excellent presentation. It's very good to hear your view regarding water management, proving to us once again how this theme is transdisciplinary, how much engagement we need from several sectors. It's very clear that it's not possible to talk about water safety without partnerships and engagement. Thank you for your contribution. Before we begin our discussion, I'd like to congratulate all the speakers that contributed with their knowledge and they were very respectful to our theme and our time. It's 11:20, perfect, and we're going to begin our discussion. To increase our interaction and make this debate more dynamic, I'm going to read a few questions that were asked for each person to reply depending on their expertise. The first question I selected is a summary of the panel and how it encompasses several themes. I'm going to suggest some collaborators to reply. So the first one is, what are the main challenges and opportunities linked to technical, economic, and cultural aspects associated to nature-based solutions, and how can they be overcome? And also another, how do you see that ODS 6 is linked to this theme? To organize this, I'm going to suggest Mr. André Baxter to talk about the technical part, Pericles Weber and Anna Salzman about the economic and cultural aspects in this order, so we can discuss this theme. Opportunities, challenges, and how this is linked to ODS 6. So, Mr. Baxter first, or SDG 6, better saying. Well, the link with SDG 6, nature-based solutions, I think Samuel and Braulio illustrated very well the importance of having a better understanding and better use of these tools and this approach to be able to fight climate change and do the transition with low carbon that necessarily we're talking about climate and atmosphere, but we must remember that water permeates all of this. So I think the main challenge we have to overcome, so we have more opportunities and seeing nature-based work being done, I perceive, I don't think that this is our routine to try and bring this into the various sectors. I think it's a cultural change. The biggest change is this: people in all spheres of society, civil society, business, government, academia, etc. People have to understand what this is, how this works, without fantasizing. And I understand that it's difficult to do this because the learning curve is long, and these are techniques or solutions and approaches that are multidisciplinary. So for one solution based on nature, like Anki and Jose Maximino said, that have to do to urban drainage, for this to work, we have layers and layers of civil engineering, water resource engineering, geotech, meteorology, so that we don't live in fantasy land thinking we're to plant trees in a vase and that this is going to save the planet. It's not the way it goes. The constructed wetlands, for instance, the challenges are enormous. The learning curve is huge. We're talking about water treatment, water that sometimes have complex signatures, such as mining water and sanitary effluents, not just putting water on a plant. We have chemical engineering, chemistry, biology, botanics. There are several disciplines and areas of knowledge being employed. So I do believe that the main barrier is cultural. People knowing the technologies and the approaches and understanding how this works and how to make this feasible. And I understand that it's very difficult because it involves study, dedication, our participation, even the participants here acting as we are acting. So it will also require time. Change takes time, time that we don't have, but it's no use thinking that things are going to happen from one day to the next or from one night to the next day. So I understand it this way. Thank you for the invitation, for the debate. I'm available for more questions. Excellent. So, summarizing, we discussed the cultural barrier to value engineering behind the nature-based solutions and doing this by knowledge sharing, which is a lot of what we're doing today, and time for the cultural change to occur. Thank you very much. Any other speaker that would like to talk about these cultural aspects or economic aspects? Well, I can add a little bit. The economic issue, as Andre said, the nature-based solutions are not necessarily easy. They require knowledge and expertise, and this makes them quite costly initially. So we have nature-based solutions that compared to gray solutions initially seem to be more expensive or seem to require greater investment, but the payback ends up coming later because we have a solution that's more durable and that will bring us many more benefits at the end of the day than a solution that looks or just a gray solution. We can work with a combination of both gray solutions with green solutions and nature-based solutions. So I've noted this in the business context that to bring the nature-based situations into the business world has not been easy due to cost issues and the cultural issues. We're accustomed of working with gray solutions, and this change of mindset of how to adapt to a green solution takes time. On the other hand, I see a great opportunity to bring nature into our system. Like it or not, humans and nature are linked. And we have separated these two components with time. But now we understand that they must reconnect. So, nature based solutions are a great opportunity to bring nature back into the cities and the business sector so that nature begins working for us as it has done before. But it can do this much better if we give it space. That's my contribution.
Great, thank you, Anki. So we understand we have significant costs with regard to implementing these nature-based solutions, but this payment is long-term. And there is also the perennity of all this, and we can return nature back to where it belongs, which is amongst ourselves, in companies, industry, amongst society. Would anyone else like to add anything? Yeah, I'd just like to add here something as an engineer, actually. I think there is a need for us to encourage new approaches, thinking differently. Sometimes we don't approach or use a nature-based solution because everyone is conditioned to using the same conventional approach, engineered. There are solutions adopted for decades. We have great challenges, of course. I agree with Anki with regard to feasibility, but we need to have a long-term view. Sometimes when a very immediate solution is looked at, looking at the initial capex, looking at nature-based solution, it may seem unfeasible. But when we think about the OPEX, the operation costs over time, and especially the benefit this will bring in terms of people's quality of life, which is sometimes unintelligible, and environmental balance, these processes become competitive with the common engineering mindset. So in my viewpoint, and now, as Andres said, when we think about culture change, the different viewpoint by engineers starts that off. It's even a provocation to academia to approach things differently so that professionals can already have this embedded in their mindset that there are nature-based solutions that can and must be adopted with a holistic view of the problem and not just looking pure and simply on to the investments I'm going to do now and the engineering investments. I really believe this approach. I think it's a way for us to bring more solutions, better solutions sometimes. I see sometimes shareholders themselves are more sensitive to this. And in the presentation of new projects, they already start asking about the impacts this will afford to the environment. What's my carbon footprint? How will I deal with this in the long run? As Andrea and Anki said, it's not something that happens overnight, but we must start constantly drawing attention to this new approach and thinking differently. Thank you, Pericles. That was a great contribution. This approach by conventional engineering can sometimes not provide this sustainable long-term management, and reinforcing that nature-based solutions can currently be considered medium to long-term investments, and it also provides this holistic view of integrated systems, nature, engineering, and the possibility of having a shorter, so to speak, payback. So, a bit of variation now. I'm going to ask a second question. How can we promote more nature-based solution initiatives, since it's a very interesting solution, as we've already been saying, and also water resilience on the value chain, and what are the main social economic impacts to this business sector? I'll open that question up to any of the speakers to talk about it or even talk on it. I can repeat the question if you like. Renata, I'll start. Yes, Anki, go ahead. Now, talking a bit about our experience within the Boticário group, my experience, the starting kickoff is that we must understand our dependency with regard to natural resources, biodiversity, and the services they render us. As long as this is not very clear within the business world, we are not able to create any other initiative which can lead us towards nature conserving actions in practice. That was an interesting learning curve that I brought and spoke to you here in my presentation right at the end. This inspired our group to look more at their own dependencies, biodiversity, natural resources as a whole, and what can I do as a business outside my four walls, understanding where these resources come from and how can I use nature conservation to continue depending on this resource, because not always can I seek another resource or work on the production process to use this resource. But at the end of the day, there are resources we cannot replace and we'll continue depending on them. So it's about working in order to guarantee that I can continue depending on this normally, but guaranteeing the resource continues to exist and extend the benefits not just to me as a business, but to all the population at large, which depends on this resource. And once we understand this view, we have this view within our business, it becomes easier for us to convey this knowledge to our value chain as a whole and make it permeate, make this nature-based solution permeate. As I said before, we talk about a water strategy, and it's about how we can influence our value chain, bringing it also towards thinking about, water in all this. It's step by step. We can't try and solve everything all the time. We must transform this into values, because this also liaises and greater convincing that this is very important for the world and for business. Great. Thank you, Anki. Anki has provided a viewpoint that everyone should have a viewpoint towards water resources, natural resources, and what Boticário Foundation has done. She talked about the resources which are irreplaceable and doing a bit at a time, and our dependencies on the finite resources that exist, biodiversity, water resources, etc. Would anybody else like to pitch in other words, how to provide more initiatives to nature-based solutions, the resilience in the value chain, and the impact for the business sector? Anyone else?
Communications. One, I think, process or reality that is emerging right now is that if we think about what we were talking about 10 years ago, we were talking about sustainability. Then 5 years ago, we were talking about climate, and then the complexity of mitigation and adaptation emerged. And now we are realizing that actually nature plays an important role. And what is the problem of all that is that it is already complex for practitioners. So what happens to the general population? For those who, and that includes not only people who go on a day-to-day basis with their lives, but also decision makers. So how we can actually transform those complex, multidisciplinary, holistic frameworks into messages that are clear. That is a work that the scientific community, the practitioners community, the international community has not done so far. And I believe that is something that is absolutely urgent, because otherwise, decision makers at a political level, decision makers at a corporate level, are not going to be able to engage with this, level of complexity. And that's a matter of concern. So for me, communications is very important. For me, I think creating simple messages that can engage leaders, including politicians, corporate leaders, as well as people, is essential. So what is the climate equivalent, or the nature-based solution equivalent of what in some point the equality movement was able to coin, something like men and women are equal? Like, that level of simplicity of message does not exist for these agendas, and that's urgent. So, in terms of, to conclude, I guess, in terms of the benefits, for me, it's also important to show that when we have this holistic perspective, when we think about the whole value chain, as Anke was suggesting, we then are able to articulate the benefits for all the actors across the value chain. And that is the important element of thinking from a resilience perspective, from a systems perspective. So really thinking about what are the options, what are the entry points, what are the places where we can create more impact, and what that means for people. So for us practitioners, the challenge is to take those very, the visions that, the political mandates, the corporate mandates, bring them to the complexity, really think about that complexity, look at the systems, look at the value chains, identify entry points, and then identify the right measures, but then take it back to the level of simplicity. We're going to work with people because that helps creating, a workforce that is more educated, that takes better decisions. We are going to work with communities because without those leaders, there are many things we cannot do. We're going to engage with the decision makers at the political level because without their mandate, for us, it's impossible to create systems and change systems in the long term. So that is, for me, something that is a huge, huge challenge, and perhaps that connects with the previous question. How we can actually, as practitioners, being able to, take mandates, create visions, really engage with people, engage with complexity, but then go back to these people, to those leaders, and then say, this is why we do things. Let's not stay in our bubble. Let's really go out there, communicate better, and really engage with the language that others are using.
Excelente, Braulio. Realmente, né, a importância da gente seguir discutindo
Great,
esses temas.
Braulio. Yes, it's about continuing to discuss these multiple trans-discipline themes in order to make decisions which can move beyond our silos, our companies. So it's about engaging, government involvement, cultural alliance. This all has to do with water management and access. I will now suggest Samuel Barreto to contribute. I think he has a lot to say about this and enrich this conversation. Thank you, Renata. Very quickly, adding on to a few points. I think that the issue with regard to the mental models is very important. The dilemmas in terms that to solve scarcity problems, engineering will always solve this challenge, so to speak. Let's not forget that in Brazil, Latin America, there are no more simple solution in terms of water safety for cities. The solution is to go further at a higher cost, generating conflict about, looking at protection of the springs. This is about mental models. Also now with regard to knowledge, investment in training is very important to accelerate this understanding that what nature-based solutions can deliver in terms to water safety and also actions in the face of climate changes. That's why strategic alliances are very important. This cooperation movement must gain scale, but as CBED is doing, water resilience, CBEDs, WBCSD are all doing, I consider with all this, I think that the strengthening of existing public policies is key to think about this framework, not just volunteer, but public policies, not just looking at control mechanisms, but mechanisms which can foment these practices, such as natural water resource management. They induce sustainable practices. Sanitation as well. To be able to count on these management frameworks and movements is important. Also, investments. It's important, first of all, to channel existing investments to these practices so they can take place more effectively with being science-based planning throughout all civil society sectors, corporate sector, water sector, and other public sectors, allocate resources for this measure and allocate these investments as well. And in that respect, there are some initiatives by CEBED itself, their movement, Mais Agua from the Global Pact, Water Resilience Coalition, Viva Agua movement by the Boticário Group, Cidades pela Água, promoted by TNC. This all revolves around a water pact. Nature-based solutions, we cannot relinquish any possibility in order to make these investments. And more than the investments, this cooperation around the theme through these collective initiatives. Yes, Samuel, thanks very much. Yes, we must understand that nature-based solution aligned to engineering guarantee water security. And for these actions with regard to climate changes, once again, you brought up the need for engagement and partnerships and how public policies have a defining role in terms of water safety. So in conclusion, our time is almost up. I'm going to read the last question, which says, what are the government's roles in promoting nature-based solutions, and what are the public policies that are more efficient in order to incentivize nature-based solutions? To answer that, I will go to José Maximino. Due to his knowledge, I will ask him to solve this or answer this now. Maximino, please, you have the floor. Very interesting question, Renata. Very topical and very welcome. I think the state's role, public power in a comprehensive form, whatever federal system it is, each nation state has its own. But pulling this a bit more to the Brazilian reality, we have federal, municipal, state and municipal structures. The three entities, the union, states, and municipalities, have the duty to preserve the environment, also strive for human dignity, other fundamental rights. The Vienna Convention says that human rights have this included, embedded in them. So from a legal point of view, a legislative point of view, I think the federal government, states and municipalities must incorporate within their environmental legislation and codes, which I think is the most adequate legal level to bring this all in. They must form legislation that when they talk about environmental impact, conservation units, that's very important as well, to create conservation units with a vocation for protecting and conserving ecology, water resources. Also, in terms of impact assessment, when we think about a proportional technological assessment system, this is American law now, this impact assessment matrix, IPA. We must complement nature-based solutions, and this is valid for the sanitation and industrial branches. When we talk about not impact assessment or other systems, I would like to mention some advances such as water security plans. We have the National Water Resource Policy. We have a state and natural basin, water basin plan. But the ANA, the water agency, and the state of Rio de Janeiro have developed more operational plan, the so-called water security plans. I believe we have encouraged this with the management body, that the water safety plan can and must provide traditional and efficient solutions, but also think of nature-based solutions due to its many benefits. And as Samuel said, scale gains, one solution providing potential for the others. So security plans are a good path. If in a state this doesn't exist, you can incorporate water basin plans. Many are already doing this. In the Guandu River, which has an action plan, which is the spring that supplies 9 million people in Rio de Janeiro state. And in conclusion, I don't think a single plan will provide all the answers. A town's master plan, I think Braulio said this very well, when we think about micro all the way up to micro scale, a city's master plan can have nature-based solutions for micro draining. Water basin plan will be on a larger scale vis-a-vis water security, and also adaptation and mitigation to climate changes. So there is a liaison among all these plans, which matches them all. And in conclusion, the payment for environmental services policies, it's completed 2 years now. It's January 2021, 2 years and 2 months, and it has already provided legal security for the business sector, providing system, so to speak. It's the state incorporating the importance of providing principles and guidelines permeated by science, which are able both for the private and public sectors, can deliver mechanisms such as monitoring and diagnostics, showing you are not wasting public resources. What you're doing generates efficiency gains and also financial gains in a medium long-term view, especially within this system. So I think public powers are a very important space. I think we have to advance towards encouragement policies, especially financial tax breaks, VAT, the ICMS tax, as we call here, especially in terms of reuse. So there is a large field in politics, especially in terms of tax. There can be lower taxes so that nature-based solutions are more beneficial to the environment. Those are my contributions, therefore, Renata, that I have to offer. Thank you, José Maximino. So our speaker reinforced the need for the public policies to be aligned with the state of the art in terms of water management, also success cases, legal success cases worldwide, so that globally we can learn to approach where we want to be more quickly. He also talked about the need and the importance of a water security plan, municipal master plan, aligned or not with the basin committees, and also payment for resource use, which affords value to what really is valuable. So we are wrapping up our event here. I'd like to thank all the speakers who helped us to talk about such an important and dear theme. I'm going to invite to finish André and Braulio from the WBC and CBEDS to conclude our event, to wrap up our event. That's it from me for now. Thank you. Yes. Can I just say something here, Renata? Yes, go ahead, Bruno. We're wrapping up our event. We'll end at midday. So go ahead. We welcome your words. Can you see me? Well, my name is Bruno Ferraz. I'm an environmental management head manager at Vale. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you all for this section. I'd like to thank CBEDS and all the speakers. I found this a fantastic event, a lot of content, great participation by the participants, and you, Renata, for mediating. Thanks very much. So I'd now like to say thanks once again and give the floor to CBDS, CBDS. Thank you. Thank you for those words. Thank you for your participation. I'm sure everyone is flattered. So I give the floor to André and Braulio. Thank you, Renata. Thanks very much. Just reinforcing Renata's fantastic mediation. You are already invited to be the mediator at every events of other events. I'd like to thank the speakers, José Alexandre, Anke, Braulio, Samuel, everyone who contributed greatly to our event here. I loved your contributions, great contribution. These events we are promoting here at CBEDS are an acknowledgement of our action of being one of the spokespersons in Brazil, also within the environmental sector. We are already very strong. We have been for some years in the CPA and other theme chambers in CBED, diversity, social pact, Amazon, sustainable policies. I hope I haven't left any out. And we're going to promote an event in addition to this one. I'd like to take the opportunity to invite Renata to the event we're going to have tomorrow. Today at 3 p.m., we're going to talk about the universalization of sanitation in human rights. You are totally invited. And on World Water Day, we're going to talk about reality, amongst other things, for the business world, mining as well. We're going to talk about. So I'd like to extend my invitation to Samuel for the event on the 23rd at 3 p.m. in Brazil. Once again, I'd like to thank our sponsors for organizing this sponsor, Vale and sanitation sponsors, if you will. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thanks very much. Pleasure for me to be part of this team. I hope you have made the most of this great moment we had here to discuss, to engage, and to do our bit. Okay?